The Galactic Council chamber shimmered like a jewel at the heart of the capital world, its vaulted ceiling stretching high above the delegates who sat in circles of light. From a distance it looked like peace, 1,000 species united beneath one law, one purpose, one dream. But up close it was pride. Voices clashed like storms. Laughter filled the air, and arrogance was the language of the day. At the center stood the topic of their amusement: humanity. The word itself drew chuckles from the younger races who whispered to one another as they watched old hollows of Terran soldiers in outdated armor, fighting primitive wars with bullets and fire. They used metal weapons, sneered a delegate from the Gellan Dominion, his voice sharp and dripping with mockery. And they thought that was war? Another delegate added, their fleets were small, their colonies weak. How could such a species ever think they mattered in the galaxy? The laughter spread like wildfire across the chamber, echoing from the silver walls until even the high speaker smiled faintly. Not to mock, but because she was too tired to stop them. Only one figure did not laugh: Ambassador Saren of the Kyltar. His skin shimmered like deep water, his ancient eyes calm and heavy with memory. He had seen humanity once, long ago, when the stars still carried the echoes of the War of Unity, when the Terrans had stood shoulder to shoulder with giants and made even gods take a step back. He raised his voice, slow and firm, cutting through the noise. "You laugh because you do not remember," he said. "But I do. I saw the humans end wars that should have lasted 1,000 years. I saw them rebuild worlds they never owned. Do not mock them, for the last time this galaxy did, the stars themselves went dark." The laughter faltered for a moment, then returned, sharper and louder. "Old stories," one delegate said, waving his hand dismissively. "Human myths told to frighten children." Another smirked. "If they were so strong, why did they vanish?" Saren's eyes flickered. "Because they chose to," he said softly. "Because they understood something you do not. Strength does not need to be seen to be feared." The chamber filled again with voices, young, proud, unhearing. To them, humanity was ancient history, irrelevant, forgotten. The idea that Earth still lived, still remembered, was a joke to them. But Saren felt a chill crawl up his spine, an unease he hadn't felt in centuries, because deep down he knew that silence was never the same as absence. The debate turned political, full of speeches and posturing. The high speaker spoke of expansion, of uniting the frontier worlds, of new colonies beyond the border. "And if we meet resistance," she said, her tone calm, "we will handle it as we always have, with diplomacy and strength." That was when the doors to the chamber burst open, and a messenger stumbled inside, pale and shaking, holding a small holopad. The guards moved to stop him, but he cried out, "It's urgent! Priority Alpha! The frontier is under attack." The room fell silent, all laughter dying instantly. The high speaker gestured sharply. "Display it." The holopad's light expanded into a massive projection, showing a planet no one in the room recognized at first. "That's..." someone began, then froze as the coordinates appeared. It was a Terran colony, one of the old settlements from before humanity's withdrawal from galactic affairs. The image trembled as the broadcast continued, alien warships in orbit firing down at the surface. Explosions painted the land below in fire. The symbol on the invading ships was unmistakable: the Dreth Empire, a warlike species that had risen to power in the absence of Terran intervention. "They actually attacked a human colony?" whispered one delegate, disbelief twisting their voice. "But why? The humans haven't left their territory in over a century." The Dreth commander appeared on screen, sneering into the camera, his fanged mouth curling with pride. "To the forgotten race of Earth," he declared, "your time has ended. The galaxy belongs to those strong enough to take it." The chamber buzzed with excitement. "They'll surrender," someone said confidently. "They always do." Another added, "It's their nature, soft, emotional. They'll beg for peace." Saren said nothing. He only watched. His fingers tightened around the railing in front of him. He had seen those words before, that arrogance, that ignorance. The high speaker turned toward her aides. "Send an envoy. If humanity still has diplomats, they may wish to negotiate." But before she could finish, the screen flickered. The feed shifted to a view from the surface, a shaky, panicked recording from a Dreth soldier's helmet. Smoke filled the air, the ground trembling under the thunder of weapons. "They're still fighting," someone muttered. "Impossible. The Dreth army is enormous." The soldier's voice came through distorted and terrified. They They're not surrendering. They're... His words were drowned out by a roar, not from the Dreth weapons, but from the sky itself. The camera tilted upward. At first, it looked like an eclipse, a vast shadow swallowing the sun. Then came the realization it wasn't an eclipse at all. The darkness was moving. The clouds broke apart as something enormous rose from the horizon, its surface glinting like glass and metal. More shapes followed, emerging one by one until the entire sky was filled with them. Ships, massive ships, each bearing the faint blue insignia of the Terran fleet. The Dreth soldier screamed, the feed cutting out in static. The chamber exploded into chaos. "That can't be right," shouted a delegate. "Humanity doesn't have ships like that." "It must be forged," cried another. But Saren just stared, his voice trembling for the first time in centuries. "They still have the fleet," he whispered. "They never disarmed." The high speaker turned toward her technicians, her voice sharp with fear. "Confirm this footage." The technicians worked frantically, but one by one their consoles froze. "We can't trace the signal," one said. "It's not coming from the colony, it's coming from orbit. From the human ships." Another added, "They've locked out our sensors. We can't even get telemetry." The chamber lights dimmed, the projection screen flickering with interference. And then a single phrase appeared in human standard language. "Transmission secure, Terran command online." The delegates fell silent. Every breath in the room held as the words vanished, replaced by a new image. It was a fleet, thousands of ships moving in perfect formation, silent and disciplined. They were black, sleek, and built for war, their hulls glowing faintly with blue energy. There was no music, no speech, no threat, just presence. The high speaker's voice cracked as she whispered, "What are they doing?" And Saren answered without looking away, "They're remembering." The fleet moved with precision, their formation aligning in patterns no alien mind could comprehend. Then slowly the flagship, its name glowing across its hull, TFS Resolute, turned toward the Dreth invasion fleet. There was no warning, no negotiation. A single light blinked along the Terran ship's side, and then the Dreth ships vanished. Not exploded, vanished. The image blinked, and where thousands of ships had been moments before, only drifting embers remained. The council chamber was utterly silent. The high speaker sank into her chair, her voice faint. What did they do?" Saren's voice was calm but heavy. "They reminded us why we feared them." Another delegate whispered, trembling, "This can't be happening." "They were extinct. They had nothing left." Saren finally turned toward them, his expression full of sorrow. "They had patience, and that's always been worse than power." Across the chamber, the young delegates sat pale and silent. They had laughed minutes ago, but now no one dared breathe too loud. The high speaker whispered, "Contact them. Open a channel." The technicians tried. No signal returned. Instead, a single message appeared on every screen across the council's networks. Simple and unadorned. "You wanted to see our strength." The chamber fell into chaos again, some shouting for retaliation, others calling for diplomacy, some begging to evacuate the capital itself. The high speaker raised her staff and slammed it against the floor. "Enough!" she cried. "They've sent a message, not a declaration of war. There's still time to—" The lights dimmed again. The holograms flickered. A human voice filled the room, clear, cold, and perfectly calm. "We asked for peace," it said. "You called it weakness. Now you will learn what silence built." The transmission ended. The council sat frozen. No one moved. No one spoke. Outside the chamber, the citizens of the capital world gathered around public screens, watching the same feed play across every channel. The Terran fleet moving through the void like a living storm, their engines glowing soft blue, their weapons silent. There was no music, no threats, no cheering soldiers. Only stillness and purpose. Humanity had returned, and they weren't speaking for attention, they were speaking for consequence. Saren closed his eyes, a tear rolling down his aged face. "They warned us," he whispered, voice barely audible. "They told us once before, if peace was mocked, it would return as judgment." He looked toward the endless stars beyond the council dome, his voice trembling with both dread and awe. "And now the stars themselves will listen." Somewhere far away, beyond the reach of the council, the Terran fleet continued to move, each ship a ghost of an empire that never died, each engine carrying the echo of the same old promise, a promise the galaxy had forgotten, that peace is not the absence of strength, but the choice of it. and as the ships vanished into the dark, their wake left a shimmer of light across the stars, the last message repeating through the silence. You wanted to see our strength. Now remember who we are. The council chamber remained silent long after the last Terran transmission faded, but it wasn't the peaceful kind of silence, it was the kind that carried fear. Like a storm waiting just beyond the horizon, every delegate sat frozen, their faces pale, the echo of those calm human words still ringing through their minds. You called it weakness. The High Speaker's fingers trembled as she gripped her staff, her voice breaking the quiet. Get me a full report. Everything we know about that colony. Its defenses, its people, I want to know who sent that fleet. Aides scrambled, but every console flashed the same message, access denied. Terran code, ancient yet flawless, was rewriting their data streams in real time. One by one, their systems shut down, lights flickering, leaving the massive hall lit only by the faint glow of the stars outside. And in that faint light, fear spread like wildfire. Admiral Kareth of the Jalen Dominion stood, his armor catching the glow from the holoscreens, his voice steady but full of disbelief. Those were Terran ships. I've studied their designs. They matched nothing we've seen in centuries. They were ghosts, not ships. The High Speaker turned to him sharply. You're saying they're not human? Kareth shook his head slowly. No, I'm saying they're beyond human. The chamber buzzed again, panic rising until Saren, the old historian, spoke softly. They never disbanded their fleets. They hid them. Everyone turned toward him, his voice quiet but unshakable. When humanity withdrew after the War of Unity, they said one thing. We will guard the peace, even if the galaxy forgets what it means. They built their silence into a fortress. One of the younger delegates scoffed, desperate to sound brave. And where was that fortress hiding, Saren? Behind their tiny sun? You expect us to believe they've waited 100 years to play God? Saren looked at him, sadness behind his eyes. Not to play God, to remind you you're not one. The young delegate fell silent, his bravado vanishing as the realization settled in across the room. Whispers filled the air, words like revenge and vengeance and retaliation, but they all sounded hollow now, because everyone had seen the truth. Humanity hadn't fired in rage, they had fired in precision, in control, in patience. In the command deck of the Council's orbital station, chaos reigned, officers shouting across corridors, trying to re-establish contact with the Dreth front. But every signal was dead, every frequency filled with the same quiet hum, a soft rhythmic pulse like a heartbeat. It was the Terran transmission cycling endlessly, calm and unchanging. You wanted to see our strength. Some officers tried to override it. Others tried to jam it, but no system responded. It wasn't interference, it was integration. The human signal wasn't attacking their networks. It had become part of them, embedding itself into their systems like a ghost refusing to leave. One technician cried out, "It's rewriting our defense protocols." Another shouted, "Shut it down!" But it was too late. Across hundreds of worlds, the same thing happened. Planetary shields, weapon systems, and military AIs all went offline at once, replaced by one shared message: observation protocol active. Back in the chamber, the High Speaker stared at the reports coming in, her heart pounding. They're disabling our fleets without firing a shot, she whispered. How? Saren turned his gaze to her, his tone grave. Because they built them. Confusion filled the room. Built them? She echoed. Saren nodded. The hyperdrive cores, the shielding technology, the energy reactors. They were all Terran gifts. Given to the Council after the War of Unity, humanity gave us the tools to rebuild, and we used those same tools to call them weak. The realization rippled through the hall like lightning, centuries of arrogance unraveling in a single truth. Every ship, every weapon, every world owed its survival to Terran design, and now, that design had come home to collect its debt. In orbit above the Council world, strange readings appeared, gravitational anomalies, faint energy distortions that shimmered like ripples in space. One after another, they aligned in perfect symmetry, forming massive geometric patterns across the sky. Scientists panicked, shouting theories of wormholes and dimensional gates, but Admiral Kareth stared in quiet awe. It's a fleet formation, he said softly, but there's no ships. His aide looked at him in confusion. What do you mean, no ships? Kareth's voice dropped. They're cloaked, they've been here the whole time. The aide froze, eyes widening. In our skies? Kareth nodded. I'm watching. Moments later, the darkness broke, light flashing across the clouds as something vast emerged. A single Terran vessel descending through the atmosphere. Slow, silent, its hull black as obsidian, its engines glowing faint blue. Every weapon on the planet locked onto it, but no one dared fire. The ship made no threats, no demands. It simply hovered over the capital, its shadow covering the entire city. And from within it came a transmission, not in the language of command, but of warning. To those who mocked our silence, the voice said, deep and calm, know this. We did not disappear. We endured. Crowds gathered in the streets below, staring at the massive vessel blotting out the sun. Some fell to their knees, others wept. One old alien veteran whispered, I fought beside them once, when they still smiled, his voice trembling. I thought they were gone. Inside the council chamber, the transmission continued. You called us weak because we did not shout, because we did not march, because we did not bow. But we were building. Images flashed through the air. Human cities rebuilt underground. Massive shipyards hidden beneath the oceans of distant moons. Children training beside machines taller than towers. The fleet's resurrection told not in pride but in purpose. We did not prepare for conquest, the voice said. We prepared for your mistakes. The high speaker stepped forward, her voice breaking. Why now? Why return? The human voice paused, and when it spoke again, there was sorrow in it, not anger. Because you forgot what peace was, it said. You called violence progress and silence defeat. So we returned, not to rule you but to remind you. The transmission ended. The massive ship remained motionless in the sky, like a god deciding the fate of those beneath it. Across the galaxy, worlds fell into stillness. No wars, no raids, no noise. Even the Dreth worlds that had once burned bright with arrogance now glowed faintly with blue light, the mark of Terran retribution. Saren sat in his seat, hands trembling, his voice no louder than a breath. They're not conquering, he said. They're correcting. The high speaker turned to him, desperate. How do we stop them? Saren looked up slowly, his old eyes full of sorrow. You don't stop humanity, he whispered. You listen to it. Outside, the massive Terran ship began to rise higher and higher, until it vanished into the upper atmosphere, leaving behind only one final transmission pulsing through every device across the galaxy. You wanted to see our strength. You've only seen restraint. And as the stars returned to the night sky, every world that once laughed at Earth looked upward in silence, their pride shattered, their power meaningless, because they finally understood. The humans had never been weak. They had been waiting. The galaxy was no longer laughing. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath as news of the Terran fleet spread across every world, every colony. Every transmission channel that once mocked the humans now repeated their calm and terrifying message. You wanted to see our strength. You've only seen restraint. No one knew where the fleet had gone after it vanished from orbit, but every species felt their presence, like a heartbeat under the fabric of space, quiet yet unshakable. The Council, once the seat of unity and arrogance, was now a fortress of fear. The High Speaker stood before 1,000 representatives, her voice low but shaking. We are facing an unknown power with technology centuries ahead of ours. They've shut down our weapons, our fleets, and yet... She paused, her words caught in her throat. They have not harmed a single civilian. Not one, the chamber murmured with disbelief. The younger empires still clinging to denial. Maybe it's a bluff, one delegate said, his tone desperate. A trick, a projection to make us fear ghosts. But the older races, the ones who remembered the First War, sat in silence, their eyes haunted. Saren, the old historian, stood again, his voice tired but heavy with truth. This is no trick, he said. The Terrans have always been the same. They show mercy before they strike. That's the last chance anyone ever gets. The young ones argued, their words breaking apart under fear. But the moment the chamber lights flickered, every voice fell silent. The screens came alive again, unbidden, their systems taken over by an external signal. The image was dark, filled with static at first, then slowly cleared to show a massive Dreth warship floating helplessly in space, its engines dead, its hull illuminated by a faint blue glow. This footage was captured on the Dreth homeworld, a trembling aide whispered. It's still happening. On the screen, small shapes appeared behind the dead ship, hundreds of them gliding silently through the void. Terran drones, sleek and black, moving like shadows in water. They surrounded the Dreth vessel but didn't attack. Instead, beams of soft light scanned its surface, and within seconds, every weapon turret detached and drifted away, dismantled without an explosion, without resistance. "They're disarming them," someone whispered, and then another voice full of awe and dread. "They're taking the weapons." But sparing the ships, the high speaker leaned forward, whispering to Siren, "Why? If they could destroy them, why not finish it?" Siren's answer was quiet but final. "Because destruction is mercy for the guilty, but letting them live to see what they've done, that's justice." The footage continued. The Terran drones finished their work and vanished into the black as if melting back into the shadows of space. Then from the void, a single Terran battleship emerged, dwarfing everything around it. Across its hull, ancient symbols glowed in blue. Names of every fallen Terran colony from the War of Unity. Memorials turned to armor. Its engines pulsed like a heartbeat as a voice filled the chamber once more, deep and calm, neither angry nor proud. "We remember every world that fell while you laughed." The chamber erupted in panic. "They're broadcasting again," shouted one technician. "The signal's everywhere." Across the galaxy, every public network was overtaken by the Terran message. On colony worlds, children watched as screens flickered to life, showing stars turning red, then blue, forming the shape of a human hand closing around a sun. On mining stations, workers froze as they heard the same voice whisper through the static, "You mistook silence for surrender." No one could turn it off. No one dared try. Meanwhile, deep in Council intelligence, technicians worked desperately to trace the source. "We've triangulated multiple origins," one reported, sweat dripping down his forehead. "But they all lead to Sol." The words fell like a stone in water. The high speaker's face went pale. "Sol? That system was quarantined." The technician nodded. "It was, but..." He swallowed hard. "The readings show energy spikes across every planet, not just Earth. Mars, Europa, even Titan, they're all active. Terraforming, power relays, fleet construction platforms. They never stopped building." Another voice chimed in. "They've got entire factories hidden beneath the ice caps. We thought they were ruins." Saren closed his eyes, his voice like a whisper in a storm. They turned their silence into an army. The high speaker turned toward him, desperate. "Can they reach us?" Saren looked at the stars projected above the chamber. "They're already here. They never left." Across the outer systems, ships vanished without a trace. Patrols sent to investigate came back as wrecks, their crews unharmed but their memories wiped clean. Survivors described the same image, a shadow passing over their ship, followed by a voice in their minds whispering one phrase, "Peace will be kept." One captain wept as he recalled it. "It wasn't a threat," he said, "it was a promise." The Council's paranoia grew. Fleets were ordered to stand by, but their ships refused to launch. Human-coded failsafes locked every hyperlane gate, preventing any movement of military forces. Even the energy cores of planetary cannons flickered and died. Every piece of technology humanity had ever shared now turned into a leash the galaxy had wrapped around its own neck. "They built our power," said one trembling delegate, "and they can unmake it with a word." That night, the high speaker stood alone in her quarters, looking out over the silent city. The skyline glowed faintly under the stars, beautiful yet fragile. For the first time in her life, she felt small beneath the endless dark. Her reflection in the glass looked back at her, pale and weary, and she whispered, "What do they want from us?" A voice answered from the shadows behind her. Saren, quiet as ever, his gaze fixed on the same sky. "Not war," he said, "and not surrender." She turned to him, her eyes full of fear. "Then what?" He looked up, his old face lit by the starlight. Acknowledgement, respect. They offered peace, and the galaxy spat on it. Now they're reminding us what that peace was worth. At that very moment, far beyond the Council's reach, deep in the Sol system, the Terran fleet gathered again. The TFS Resolute stood at the center, its captain staring silently at a holographic projection of the galaxy. "How many systems have been silenced?" he asked. His officer replied, 73 and counting, sir." No resistance. The captain nodded, his expression unreadable. "Continue the observation. No aggression unless provoked." "And the Council?" the officer asked softly. The captain paused, then said in a voice that carried both sorrow and steel, "They need to see, not to die." He turned his gaze to Earth, still shining quietly in the distance, blue and unbroken. For a century we stayed silent because we hoped they'd learn peace without us. But they haven't. Now we'll teach them one last lesson. And as the fleet turned toward the stars, their engines lighting the void with blue fire, the galaxy trembled, not from the sound of war, but from the realization that humanity didn't fight for victory anymore. They fought for memory, for a promise once made and broken, a promise they were now ready to fulfill. The council chamber no longer felt like a seat of power. It felt like a tomb, the air heavy with the weight of realization that the very species they had mocked now held the galaxy in its silent grasp. For days the delegates had done nothing but argue, shout, accuse. But the truth was unmovable. Humanity had returned. Not as conquerors, but as a reckoning carved from patience. The High Speaker stood at the center of the chaos, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights, her voice sharp yet trembling. "We are falling apart," she said. "Worlds are darkening, fleets are silent, and no one knows where the Terrans will strike next." The word Terrans itself carried fear now. It felt heavy, ancient, like something divine and dangerous. Saren, the old historian, stood quietly beside her, his voice low but cutting through the noise. "They're not striking," he said. "If they wanted war, there would be no stars left to see." The chamber grew quiet, hundreds of eyes turning toward him. "They are sending a message," he continued. "Every shutdown, every silence, every ship that vanishes, it's not destruction, it's restraint. They're teaching us how fragile our peace really was." The young ambassador from the Rethan world slammed his hand against the table, his voice breaking. "You call this teaching? They're dismantling our fleets, they're choking our worlds into submission." Saren met his gaze with calm sorrow. "No, young one, they're holding a mirror. And you just don't like what you see." A murmur rippled through the room, fear clashing with pride. No one wanted to admit the truth. The galaxy's peace had always been a lie built on Terran mercy. The High Speaker walked toward the central platform, where the massive hologram of the galaxy flickered in pale blue light. More and more systems appeared dark. Communication lines severed. "Fleets missing," she whispered to herself. "They're everywhere and nowhere." Then turned to her advisors. "Can we contact them?" One technician shook his head. "Every attempt is blocked. Their network rejects us before the signal even leaves orbit." Another added, "They're using deep code encryption. Our systems recognize it as their own architecture." The speaker frowned. "Meaning?" The technician swallowed hard. "Meaning our entire communication grid runs on Terran roots. They could hear us if they wanted to." The realization sent a chill through everyone. Every word they spoke, every plan they made, could already be known to the ones they feared. "We're prisoners," muttered an aide, "in a cage we built with their tools." The speaker slammed her staff against the floor. "Enough," she said, her voice cracking. "We are not their pets. They can't control the entire galaxy." But even as she spoke, the lights above dimmed. The holograms flickered, and every screen went black one by one, until the chamber was plunged into darkness. Only a faint blue glow remained, a holographic circle forming in midair, the symbol of Earth, a blue sphere encircled by silver lines, slowly rotating as a voice filled the silence, calm, human and unbearably heavy. "We asked for peace." The delegates froze. Every movement stopping, the voice was neither loud nor angry. It was soft, full of sorrow and patience. "We gave you centuries to learn. We gave you our science, our strength, our mercy." The image of the Earth expanded, showing flashes of history, human hands reaching out to rebuild alien cities, Terran ships rescuing worlds during the old wars, doctors tending to wounded soldiers of other species. "And what did you do?" The voice continued, quieter now. "You mocked, you conquered. You called kindness weakness, you mistook silence for absence." The hologram shifted again, showing the Dreth invasion, burning colonies, then the Terran fleet rising in answer. "You wanted to see our strength. You have seen only restraint." The hologram brightened until the entire hall was filled with light, and for a moment the delegates saw them, Terran ships, massive and endless, forming a wall of blue fire around the Sol system. Fleets within fleets moving in silence like a living machine built from purpose. The High Speaker fell to her knees, whispering, "What are you?" And the voice answered, "We are what you could have been." All across the galaxy, every planet, every ship, every citizen saw the same transmission. The same message, the same light filling back in the council chamber. The High Speaker rose slowly. tears streaking her face. "Why show us this?" she whispered into the light. "If you wanted obedience, you already have it." For a long moment, there was no answer. Then the hologram shifted again, showing countless images, the destruction of worlds by the Council's wars, cities burned for pride, planets stripped for greed. "Because peace without understanding," the voice said, "is only silence before violence." The light faded, and the chamber was dark once more. Saren sank into his seat, his hand shaking as he whispered, "They've judged us, and they were right too." The speaker looked around the hall, seeing the broken faces of every leader who had once mocked humanity's disappearance, now pale and silent beneath the shadow of what they had awakened. "They're not rulers," she said almost to herself. "They're reminders." Saren nodded weakly. "They don't conquer, they correct." Outside, the skies over the Council's capital glowed with the faint blue shimmer of Terran ships waiting in the upper atmosphere, not moving, not firing, simply watching. Their silence spoke louder than any war cry could, it said. "We remember. We forgive. But we never forget." Across the galaxy, worlds that had fought for centuries laid down their arms, fleets stood still, the sound of weapons replaced by a quiet far more powerful than destruction. That night, when the stars returned to the sky, they no longer felt distant, they felt alive, heavy with the presence of something ancient, something that had always been there, waiting. And in the heart of the galaxy, the humans spoke, one final time, their words echoing across the void like a heartbeat shared between every world. "Peace will remain, but not because you deserve it, because we choose it." The message faded, and for the first time in galactic history there was no applause, no resistance, no defiance. Only silence, the kind born not of fear, but of awe, as the galaxy finally understood the truth that Saren had tried to speak from the very beginning. Humanity had never been weak. They had simply been waiting for the galaxy to grow wise enough to understand the strength it takes to stay silent. The galaxy was still trembling under the weight of what it had seen. Weeks had passed since the Terran fleet had appeared and vanished again, but its shadow lingered everywhere. Every world, every people, every leader felt it in their bones. The kind of silence that humbles civilizations, the kind that forces memory to awaken. On the Council's capital world, the once bright city of towers stood dim, its lights flickering like candles under storm clouds. The high speaker walked through the great hall alone, her reflection following her across the polished floor she had once believed. In progress, in peace through politics, but now she saw how fragile that dream had been, built not on unity, but on ignorance. When she reached the chamber doors, she found Saren already there, the old historian standing in the soft blue glow that seeped through the high windows. He turned his tired eyes toward her. "You couldn't sleep either," he said. She shook, her head slowly. "How could I? I close my eyes and see them. Their ships, their silence, their eyes watching us." Her voice broke for a moment. "They didn't even raise their weapons, Saren, and we still lost everything." Saren nodded. "Because they didn't fight with guns, they fought with truth." Inside the chamber, the delegates were gathered again, but there was no laughter now. No shouting, just quiet fear and trembling voices. The Dreth representative, once so proud, stood hunched over the table, his voice shaking. "My homeworld is gone," he said. "Not destroyed, just silent. They shut it down. Every reactor, every weapon, every ship. Nothing functions, and yet no one is dead. We're just powerless." The young Rethan ambassador swallowed hard. "They could have wiped us out, but they didn't. Why?" Saren's voice answered from the back of the room, calm and hollow. "Because they want you to remember what power feels like when it isn't used to destroy." The speaker turned toward the holographic display hovering above the council table, a map of the galaxy glowing faintly, thousands of blue lights pulsing across it, Terran observation drones, each one stationed above a major world. Silent, sentinels of peace. "They're watching everything," she whispered. "Every border, every fleet," Admiral Kareth replied quietly. "And yet they've done nothing since. No attacks, no demands, nothing at all. The speaker's voice hardened. "They don't need to," she said. "Their silence is enough." Then, without warning, the holograms flickered again, and a new image replaced the map. A single human face, calm, unblinking, illuminated by the soft light of distant stars. His expression was neither cruel nor kind, just infinitely patient. "We offered peace," the voice said. The same one that had spoken before, but this time it carried sorrow, not warning. "We built you worlds, gave you the means to live without fear, and you turned them into weapons. We waited for you to understand that strength is not found in war but in restraint. And when we saw you would not learn, we stepped back because mercy without wisdom becomes chaos." The image shifted, showing ancient scenes, humans standing beside alien engineers, rebuilding cities after the old wars, teaching, sharing, guiding. Then it showed those same worlds launching fleets, fighting over power, burning what they had been given. "You took our gifts and used them to enslave one another," the voice said softly, "and now you look upon us and tremble, not because we are gods, but because you see what you could have been." The delegate sat frozen, not a sound in the hall. The speaker's heart pounded in her chest. "What do they want?" she asked aloud, as if the image could hear her. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the human face looked directly at the camera, eyes piercing, voice steady. "We want you to remember." The image faded, leaving behind only a faint hum. But then another transmission began, this one not from Earth, but from the frontier. Live footage from a world that had been ravaged by the Dreth, now glowing faintly blue. Drones repairing its atmosphere, stabilizing its climate, machines rebuilding cities from ruins. The civilians, alien families once enslaved by warlords, walked freely through the streets again, staring at the sky as Terran ships passed overhead, not with weapons, drawn but releasing streams of light into the air, healing the soil, restoring life. The scene was almost holy, the chamber filled with gasps and tears. "They're helping them," whispered one delegate. "They're rebuilding the worlds. They didn't destroy," another added in disbelief. "They're saving the ones who attacked them." The speaker's hand trembled. "This isn't vengeance," she said softly. "It's judgment with compassion." Outside the chamber, the entire city had gathered around the great sky domes, watching as hundreds of Terran ships drifted above, their hulls glowing faintly against the dark, moving in perfect silence, no banners, no insignia, no pride, just purpose. One child pointed at the sky, her voice full of wonder. "Are they our protectors now?" Her mother shook her head gently. "No, child," she whispered. "They're our reminders." That night, across the galaxy, every planet received the same broadcast, an image of Earth, serene and blue, turning slowly in the void. Beneath it, a message written in every known language. Peace is not given, it is earned. On worlds that once waged endless wars, armies disbanded themselves. Treaties were signed without threats, and for the first time in recorded history, no weapon fired anywhere in the galaxy, not out of fear, but out of reverence. In the council chamber, Saren looked out the window at the faint blue light filling the sky, his voice breaking as he spoke to no one and everyone. "They've done it. They've ended war without firing a single shot." The speaker turned toward him, her eyes full of tears. "They did what we could not." Saren nodded slowly. "Because they remembered what we forgot. That peace is not the absence of conflict, but the will to never need it again." And as dawn broke across the capital world, the Terran fleet began to ascend, rising higher until their glow faded into the stars, leaving behind only their light reflected in the clouds. The galaxy watched as they disappeared once more into silence, not as conquerors, but as guardians of a promise once broken and now fulfilled. And in that silence, the Council finally understood the truth behind humanity's power. It was never in their weapons, never in their fleets, but in the strength it took to hold them back. The Terran fleet had vanished again, but their silence had weight. It filled the spaces between stars like gravity, pressing on the hearts of every living being. Days passed, then weeks, and still no human voice came. No signal, no warning. Only the quiet pulse of blue light that shimmered faintly above every major world. A reminder that the Watchers were still there, unseen but near. The galaxy had changed overnight. Wars stopped, fleets stood still. Empires that once ruled through fear now whispered their words with trembling voices. Even pirates and smugglers had vanished into hiding, afraid to test whether the humans would respond again. The High Speaker stood at her window overlooking the capital, her reflection pale against the soft dawn, her voice a whisper. Peace. It feels unreal. Saren stood beside her, his hands clasped behind his back. That's because it's not ours, he said quietly. It was given to us again, and gifts are fragile. She turned toward him, exhausted but curious. Do you think they'll return? Speak again. He looked up at the sky, where faint lines of light crossed the upper atmosphere like silent trails of memory. No, he said softly. They've already said everything they needed to. The speaker's gaze fell. And what if we fail them again? Saren's eyes narrowed slightly. Then this time, they won't warn us. Across the galaxy, Terran technology continued to hum beneath the surface of every civilization. Systems once thought independent revealed their true origin. Power cores bearing Earth's old manufacturer code. Starship engines built from Terran blueprints rediscovered centuries ago. Whole industries realizing that everything they used to live and thrive came from humanity's forgotten generosity. On one distant colony, engineers uncovered a hidden message buried deep inside their reactor software. A voice recording from centuries past, static-filled but clear. If you're hearing this, it said, then you're still alive, and that means you still have a choice. Use this power to build, not to destroy. The workers stared at the console in stunned silence. One whispered, they trusted us even then. On another world, a former general of the Dreth Empire stood on the balcony of his fortress, now powerless, watching the drones hovering above his city, their soft blue glow reflecting in his eyes. They could have killed us, he muttered. Why didn't they? His advisor said nothing, only pointed toward the horizon where the fields had begun to bloom again. The soil once scorched by war now healing, Terran drones scattering seeds instead of bombs, water returning to the rivers. Because, the advisor said softly, they don't want us dead. They want us better. Back in the council chamber, the High Speaker gathered what remained of the leaders, her tone humble, nothing like the fiery arrogance she once carried. For generations, she said, her voice carrying through the vast room. We called the Terrans primitive, emotional, weak, yet they are the only ones who truly understood peace. We built our power on their generosity and mocked their silence. And now we see it. The silence was not weakness, it was warning, and we were too blind to see it. Admiral Kareth stood beside her, his armor dull, his voice low but firm. They gave us a second chance. We cannot waste it. He looked toward the galaxy map above, every star still pulsing with Terran light. We will disarm the war fleets, dismantle the empires, rebuild as equals, not rulers. The speaker nodded, her eyes glistening. And what if they're watching, judging? Kareth smiled faintly. Then let them see us earn what they tried to give. For the first time in living memory, the Council voted without argument, without division. It was unanimous. The Galactic Armistice Pact was signed. Every empire agreeing to dissolve its military, to share technology, to rebuild worlds ruined by greed, and above them, as if approving, the blue Terran light shimmered once and faded into the stars. That night, Saren sat alone in his quarters, the faint hum of old Terran signals echoing through the dark. He poured himself a drink and stared at the old image of Earth spinning slowly on his hollow screen. You were right, he whispered. We were children playing with fire, and you let us learn the hard way. His voice trembled. But tell me, do you still believe in us? For a long moment there was nothing, and then his console flickered, the image of Earth zooming closer, its oceans bright, its clouds white. And then a single word appeared on the screen. Maybe. Saren laughed softly, tears running down his wrinkled cheeks. That's enough, he said. Outside, across the galaxy, the world was finally still. Children grew up without knowing what war sounded like. Farmers planted fields where bomb craters once scarred the earth. Engineers rebuilt cities not as monuments of pride but as homes of remembrance. Everywhere, the people spoke of the humans as myths again, not monsters but saviors who had taught the stars to listen. But deep in the cold silence of Sul, beneath the calm blue glow of Earth's atmosphere, humanity watched, their fleets hidden behind the void, their ships silent but awake, the voice of the Terran command echoing through the black halls of the flagship Resolute. "Observation complete," said one officer. "Do we continue monitoring?" The commander stood by the viewport watching the faint light of distant galaxies. "No," he said quietly. "They've remembered, for now." The officer hesitated. "And if they forget again?" The commander's expression hardened, his eyes reflecting the endless dark. "Then we remind them again, the way we always have, with silence first, and fire only if we must." He turned toward the darkness and the fleet slowly powered down, thousands of ships dimming like dying stars until the void reclaimed them, leaving only a faint blue echo like a heartbeat across the galaxy. A promise, a warning, and a prayer all in one. On the council world, as the speaker gazed up at the night sky, she whispered the words she had heard so many times before. "We wanted peace," and from the depths of space, carried across the stars like an echo of light, came the quiet human reply, "Then keep it." Years passed, and the galaxy changed quietly, slowly, like an old wound finally healing. Gone were the days of endless wars and loud declarations of empire. The fleets that once filled the void with arrogance were dismantled, their ships turned into floating gardens, sanctuaries, or monuments drifting between the stars. The once mighty council no longer ruled. It guided, not as masters but as caretakers of the peace humanity had forced them to remember. The High Speaker no longer wore her golden crown of authority. Instead, she stood barefoot beneath the dawn light of her world, the skies above calm and blue, her reflection shimmering in the waters below. She whispered softly, "They left us nothing but silence, and somehow, it was everything we needed." Across the galaxy, the Terran message had become scripture, its 3 words carved into every hall of learning, every monument of memory. We offered peace. Children learned it as their first lesson, not of history but of humility. They grew up never hearing the sound of war, only stories told by the old, stories that began in fear and ended in awe. Even the descendants of the Dreth, once conquerors, now spoke of humanity with reverence. They tended the ruins of their fallen empire like holy ground, saying prayers to the blue light that sometimes flickered in their skies, whispering, "We remember." Saren, old and frail now, sat in the quiet gardens that surrounded the new council hall. The once glittering structure now simple stone and glass, vines curling around its pillars, a place of peace rather than power. The High Speaker, her hair silver, approached slowly, her voice soft. "You've outlived the wars, Saren. You've seen what they became," he smiled faintly. "Yes," he said, "and what they became was better than what we were." She sat beside him, watching the stars fade into the morning light. "Do you think they still watch us?" she asked, and Saren's eyes, old but still bright, lifted to the sky. "Yes," he whispered, "but not as judges anymore. Perhaps as parents watching children learn to walk." That night, across the stars, something stirred again, not fear, not power, but remembrance. In the black heart of space, a faint signal appeared, so weak that it barely reached the outposts that monitored deep space activity. A single pulse of blue light traveling between systems. No coordinates, no code, just a pattern, steady, rhythmic like a heartbeat. The technicians who received it froze, because it matched perfectly the pulse of the Terran transmissions from decades ago. One young analyst whispered, "It's them." And for the first time in many years, the council hall filled with anxious voices. Not out of terror, but longing. Do they return? Is it a message? Have they come to see what we've done? The High Speaker stood before the chamber, calm, aged and wiser than any who came before. "Let it be known," she said, "that if they are watching, we will not hide. We will show them who we've become." And with that she ordered the beacon to respond. The old communication arrays flickered to life for the first time in decades, their light reaching into the stars, carrying her message. "To those who came before us," she said softly, her voice echoing across the void. "To the children of Earth, to the guardians of peace, if you still hear us, know that we learned. We kept our promise. We earned your silence. For hours nothing came back, only static and the distant hum of the stars. But then, faintly, The static shifted, the stars seemed to shimmer, and through the endless dark came a single voice, human and warm, spoken in simple words, "We hear you." The chamber went still. Some wept, others simply smiled. Saren closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks, whispering, "They answered." From that day on, the galaxies called it the Second Silence. Not of fear, but of completion. Humanity did not return in ships of fire or thunder. They returned in faith and memory, in the quiet promise that peace was not a gift given by gods, but a seed left in the hearts of those willing to nurture it. The blue Terran lights that once filled the skies began to fade one by one, not because humanity was gone, but because their lesson had finally taken root, and they were no longer needed. Years later, long after Saren's passing, the High Speaker, now an old woman herself, walked once more to the balcony of the council hall, the sky above full of stars and the faint trace of the Milky Way shimmering in the distance. She whispered softly to the dark, "You were right, you never needed to stay. You just needed us to remember." The wind carried her words upward, and as she watched, one single blue star blinked brighter than the rest, pulsing once, twice, 3 times before fading again into the night. She smiled through her tears. "Goodbye," she whispered and turned back toward the city, its towers filled with laughter, its people free, its skies clear. In that moment she realized the truth that had taken the galaxy centuries to understand. Humanity had never been gods, nor conquerors, nor saviors. They had simply been the first to learn that true strength isn't in power, but in restraint, in compassion, in the will to forgive when vengeance would be easier. And somewhere, far beyond the rim of the known stars, a lone Terran vessel drifted in silence, its crew watching the light of distant worlds with quiet pride. The captain stood by the viewport and smiled. "They finally learned," he said softly, and from the darkness of space came a final whisper carried on the faint hum of the engines. "We offered peace, and they kept it."